Welcome to your Best Defense podcast with Jackie Ford. Passion, energy, and courage. Jackie Ford is unintimidated and a bit untamed when she needs to be. Your best defense is a good offense. Jackie Ford, not afraid of a fight, and always fighting for what is right.
Welcome to Your Best Defense podcast. My name is Jackie Ford, and you're rejoining us today while I'm visiting with my friend Dax Eubank. Dax and I are discussing the militarization of police and how that has affected the community and the criminal justice system. Thanks for joining us.
I'm not saying that it's going to be, and you know, every day I read a story or see a video or look at a new study just to see that, you know, it really is pretty bad. And the so-called land of the free that we live in is really
Not so free.
It's a marketing term more than it is an actual description.
Right.
But the ideal is still there, and I think people are waking up to it in a lot of ways.
I think people are waking up to it now too, you know, and it's unfortunate that it took it getting so bad that it ended up in the back doors of everyday regular citizens to finally get jazzed up. But if that's what it takes, and we can start making a legitimate change in our communities, both on our side, meaning when I say our side, I don't mean the criminal side as much as I'm a criminal defense lawyer, but I defend the people, right? Mm-hmm. And on the people side and citizens versus law enforcement, it would just be an incredible world to live in that it wasn't like that it wasn't so inherently adversarial at every single encounter.
Well, and also it's not only adversarial, but it's fraudulent. And so, you know, here we have this system that's supposed to administer justice, but then you go and look at the court dockets and how many people there actually have a victim. How many people on that court docket actually victimized somebody with what they did, and how many of them are on there for the only person the only thing they victimized was the state itself by, you know,
offended the dignity of the state of Oklahoma
by not turning my turn signal on 100 feet before I changed lanes or something like that, right?
And now that should be an arrestable offense, right?
Yeah, and that kind of stuff, it makes me think that there's just a bunch of crazy people out there, because the Sandra Bland thing happens in Texas, right? And the rationale given for pulling her over was that she didn't use her turn signal. And then it turns into this typical kind of stereotypical police brutality encounter, which ends up with her death in the jail. And then not a week or two later, Oklahoma City Council's response to that seems to be, you know what, we need to make it easier for our cops to pull people over for not signaling when they turn lanes.
Clearly enough people don't die in the Oklahoma County jail
because
every day.
Clearly this cop, you know, is being questioned about the legality of pulling Sandra Bland over for not signaling, and we need to make sure that our cops don't have to face that kind of scrutiny. And what in the world does that create in the minds of the public, in the minds of, it just continues to
it really is crazy,
it's
right?
Insane.
And you sit there, and I read them every day too, and I get on social media and I read newspapers and I try to keep myself really informed, and I find myself just pulling my hair out going, I can't be the smartest person in the room, right?
Well,
I just know that I'm not.
And
so who are these people running our world?
I mean, here we are having a philosophical discussion, right?
Right.
And so I'm trying to put myself into your shoes, because the discussion that you and I are having right now is full of solutions, right? I mean, we're looking at education, we're looking at and it's also full of respect for the actual role of a police officer.
Well, sure.
I mean, in my mind it is.
I don't want my police officers to have to be, trained, let alone be actually in fear of being murdered on a traffic stop.
Right.
I wouldn't want to live in that environment either.
Right. But I think that on the other hand, I can imagine when you're in front of the system and trying to navigate a client through that system, it's a completely different conversation.
It is very different.
Because it's not based in reason. It's based in a statutory law that is made by crazy people who make laws like you need to signal 100 feet before you change lanes, otherwise a man with a gun is going to pull you over and assume that you're going to try to kill him. I mean, because that's the situation.
And when you die in jail 3 days later,
It's
the
no
world
big
will
deal.
say it's your fault because you should have signaled.
You should have signaled.
You should have signaled.
And so here we are having one conversation as just, and if you sat a police officer down in the room with us, he could join in this conversation and add to it, and there would be a lot of just really great,
Right.
reasonable solutions come out of it. However, you move this conversation to the courtroom, and now all of a sudden it becomes this unreasonable thing that's detached from reality, and that is its motives are completely suspect, right? And so you don't trust it, and you're just praying that it doesn't kill you,
Right.
literally. And I mean, something tells me that isn't the system that our forefathers envisioned.
Certainly. You would hope not, right? And it's sad. My clients go through this process afraid of the known, afraid of the unknown. And more often than not, I hear myself say, and nobody's telling you this is fair, but I'm telling you it's legal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we have conversations with juries, you know, we've got a no jury nullification. Why I can't argue jury nullification is the most obscene thing in the entire world, because if we have a crazy law that in application is affecting the community in a manner that we know it was not designed, then why then should the community, the actual citizens, not be able to say no more, right?
How about not even a crazy law? How about a law that on the facts apply, but in the spirit don't?
Right.
And let the community decide, right?
Right.
And so you bring a guy who the facts of the law all say that he's guilty of breaking the law, but the jury can sit there and look at the extenuating circumstances and say, you know what?
That was justified.
We don't care, right?
Right.
We acquit. And that's the whole idea of our system of government is that it never assumed that the lawmakers were all knowing and all powerful and able to,
Foresee every possible
exactly.
outcome.
And so the ultimate power was given to the jury, but also that jury isn't given a power that can create precedents.
Right.
Right? So one guy can get let go of a law, and another guy can be convicted of the same law based upon the standards of the community, which is represented by the jury. And you say, well, that's subjective. Well, yeah. I mean, it kind of is subjective, because the only law that isn't subjective is like the law of gravity, the law of the physical
Right.
science laws, right?
Right.
And nobody has to enforce those laws. They enforce themselves. But when we're trying to live in a just society, when we're trying to maintain justice and ensure that people aren't victimized, well, that's upon us to put some effort into it. And we need to have some flexibility to do that, because the situations are different. And like you said, for it to be, forbidden for you to tell a jury that that's their right is ridiculous. And
Right.
it's not justice at all. It doesn't serve justice at all.
It's the imbalance of power. And I think it kind of goes back to what you said. They can only have as much power as we give them. And we can't give them more than what we have. And so we've got to start taking the power back.
Well, and power in my philosophy is born of dependency. And so the reason, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And so if one hand on the body is feeding you and the other hand is beating you, you might not fight the hand that's beating you, because you're dependent upon that other hand to be fed, right?
Right.
And so we end up depending, and so government knows this, that they know how to establish their power. However, when we become more self-sufficient, when we start taking care of our own communities, little things, doing our own charitable work, getting out and getting to know people, it becomes the hand of force becomes a little more inappropriate. We begin to see it as something that we don't want, right? So, for instance, right now, if a lady was making tortillas or something on the side of the road and selling them, literally a cop could walk up and shut her down. And if she resisted, he could lock her up. for making tacos without the proper paperwork. Right?
And we see it with the little kids in their lemonade stands.
Exactly.
It's happening.
Right.
These aren't extreme examples. These are not theoretical. This is actually happening.
And and to me, that it looks ridiculous, right? So why not just let her sell the tacos or whatever she's doing?
Why can't I assume the risk to
Why
get the
don't
taco off a truck,
Yeah.
right?
And why don't but the other question is why don't, when I see that happen, why don't I step in and stop it? Right?
Well, you know why. Because you're getting arrested too.
Right, exactly.
Right? We
Right.
know this.
And nobody will support me.
Right.
Right? Because we're all a little bit dependent upon the system. And we're all a little bit afraid that we don't have each other's back too.
Right.
And so we don't want to, and also my life's pretty good. Why would I want to get caught up in your drama, right?
Right.
So I don't want to, and so what that does, that apathy and that, it just begins to create more room for the state to do the things that they do and oppress. And they start with the poor, the marginal, every population that is oppressed is some population that the rest don't care about that much.
Right.
And then that's where the roots of state power are established. So if you look in Oklahoma, the homosexual population or the Muslim population or the minority population, the drug users, these are people that are marginalized in some way, and when they're oppressed, people don't really care.
Right.
And because it's not me,
and it would never happen to me because
Right.
I'm not gay, I'm not black, and I'm not poor, or whatever,
Exactly. And so but what we don't realize is that by tolerating that, we're allowing the state to entrench itself into with force into our communities. And that force, at some point, if you come up against it, you're not going to have a chance. And nobody's going to be there to back you up either.
Well, and it's tough. It's tough to defend yourself.
Right.
My clients learn the hard way that innocence costs extra. And we say it with a smile on our face, but it's a fact. And so not falsely accused. Can't you just call the judge? No, I can't. It doesn't work that way, and it's not meant to continue to profit on the back of bad policies. But I find myself, if I'm real honest, I am part of the system, and law enforcement doesn't want to call me part of the system. But I remind them all the time that I'm law enforcement too, right? I enforce the law against the government, while the government enforces it against the people. But it's a sad truth that the innocent person who has to go defend themselves has to pony up more than the guilty guy who wants to just go in and get a good deal and get out of town.
Right.
And it doesn't even seem like it should be right until you understand that the justice system is an unjust system, and to get the just result requires 10 times the work, a lot more resources, judicial resources.
Everything is pitted against the innocent person. Even down to what we talked about before with the jury not even being allowed to consider, anything but the law. Right. And so, or the facts of the case. They can't look at the law and they say, we don't like this law in this case.
Right.
It doesn't apply. They're instructed not to do that, in fact. Which is, to me, it's like, why even have a jury? Why not just let the judge decide?
Right.
Right? But you do create that kind of, where the innocent person is at a disadvantage. It's a lot easier, a lot quicker, a lot cheaper just to go plead something you didn't do and go on with your life.
It's a terrible reality of the criminal court system.
And it's something that we need to let people know about and work on changing. And we live in a new age of information. Like you said, you're not aware if the police violence is worse today or if we just know about it more.
Right.
Well, we do know about it more. I mean, it's easier to get the information.
Right.
And it's also easier to get the information out. Take, for instance, that civil asset forfeiture hearing that we went to.
Yeah.
We had quite a few people show up that in the past, before the internet, nobody would have showed up to that thing.
Right.
Unless they were personally invited by, somebody
in the inner crowd.
Yeah, exactly. And they would have had it out at the Tulsa Police Academy, and they would have rah-rahed their idea, and they would have got done whatever they want to got done.
Right.
But because we can get information out to people, And because people can begin to see stories and to read these things and to understand, I think, the human mind is a rational engine. And when it's presented with truth or that contradicts the paradigm that it's operating in, it really doesn't like that. And it will deal with it, and it will change how it sees the world in order to accommodate for that information. And so that getting that information out to people is absolutely the most powerful thing that you can do. It's more powerful than passing a law, especially when you're trying to pass a law in an environment where it's not going to get passed.
Right.
Right? The goal should never be to pass the law. The goal should always be to change minds, to use the opportunity of the conflict, of the public battle, of the hearing, to present a truth and to get that into people's minds so it begins to break. I call them mental firewalls.
Fair enough. I like that.
So we live in these constructs in our minds, and most of them were given to us by somebody else. Okay, most
parents,
teachers,
pastors,
teachers, school. Yeah, all these are constructs that we've been given. It creates our culture, and most of them we didn't create on our own, right? So we don't know why we think this way. We've never thought about why a cop has more authority than a regular person. Nobody ever. They just assume that that's how it is.
Because that's the way it's always been.
That's the way it's always been. But then when you start planting little nugget, was a cop a human being? Yeah. Well, where does the cop get these rights? Is he a special kind of human being? Does he get special rights from God? And when you start to logically work these things out, all of a sudden it doesn't make sense. And this thing that I've held as true and it is a part of my identity now has a glaring contradiction logically. And the human mind will not deal with that. It will either resolve it by changing its mind, or it'll find some way to deal with it, like through drugs and alcohol.
Right.
Like the one of the funny things is when you start talking about drug policy, we've been so, enamored with this idea that drugs are bad and the drug war is a just cause, that when you start to challenge people on it, it's like you're challenging their religion. It's a sacredly held idea that just say no and all of these ideas they grew up with. Mm-hmm. And when you start to we'll work through this logically. And when it starts to not make sense, I like to say that they'll actually develop a drug problem getting over the drug problem. Right?
Right.
Because they only have one of two choices. They either have to accept the reality and adjust their frame of mind accordingly, or they have to figure out a way to cope with the cognitive dissonance. And drugs and alcohol actually work pretty well for that. So.
Lots of history of that.
Right. So they can anesthetize themselves basically to the cognitive dissonance. And so kind of in my worldview and in what I do, it's a lot easier for me because I live in that philosophical real world solution where I can just spout off ideas and people can listen to them, and sometimes they get them and sometimes they don't. And at the end of the day, the world changes, but in little bitty increments. Versus you who has to go up in front of a judge and convince somebody not according to reason, not according to logic, not according to
right and wrong,
but according to the law, who may have been written by a group of crazy people who have no basis or don't even have a connection to the culture or the context that this case is being presented within. And that's a much different kind of skill set, and I guarantee, and I don't envy the just the stress that it has to bring, especially a person like you who I've heard speak on other issues and see you as an activist. Having to reconcile those two worlds is definitely going to be a challenge.
It certainly is, but I think we're doing it. I always say, be the change you want to see, right? And as much as there are many days I want to go bury my head in the sand and plead ignorance and turn up the music and not pay attention to the reality, I think what we have to do and what we're doing, what I appreciate from you and for you helping us doing it today, is educating people and keeping the conversation alive, not just when it's hot, not just when the Senate meetings are happening, but keeping the conversation alive and on the forefront, because I think that's how we change people's minds too. It's the whole, 90s version of Rock the Vote. I mean, I remember getting empowered and inspired to be informed by MTV, you know? And thank goodness, because from that, at a very young age, I rocked the vote in my little community, you know? And I think Anna, my assistant, will tell you that I'm the reason she registered to vote. I mean, I just lit into her when I realized she was 20-something years old and wasn't registered and wasn't voting in local elections and things like that, because we have to be the change we want to see and keep the conversation alive and keep progress moving forward, because we have to move forward, right? We can't move backward, and we can't stay still. So
we have to be at least a bulwark against the encroachment of the state onto the individual rights, and for the past, for a long time they've been allowed to do it kind of under the cloak of darkness. They had control of the media, the newspapers, the television, so the narrative was theirs.
Right.
And so all of the stories of injustice were word of mouth and almost like a conspiracy.
Well, yeah,
theory,
it was
right?
Everybody's crazy Uncle Dennis, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or it was, they all looked so anecdotal that you couldn't see any kind of systemic problem, right? But now with the internet and with our ability to just see things on a larger scale, we're starting to see, no, this is a systemic problem. There is a problem with policy in our country. It is creating an adversarial relationship between the people and the police, and between the people and their government in general. And it's not healthy, and it's only benefiting a tiny fraction of the people in our country, and it's victimizing everybody else.
Right.
And as more people become aware of it, it doesn't mean that the bad guys out there that are doing this on purpose, that are actually promoting these systems because they want power, doesn't mean they're going to stop, but it does mean that they have to adjust their tactics to be more palatable to us.
Right.
And so the smarter we are, the more aware we are, the more outraged we get, the more they have to kind of shrink back and say, okay, and so it's this ongoing ebb and flow, this back and forth between people who want to live peacefully and people who want to aggressively live at the expense of other people.
Right.
And as you kind of do that, the more we know, the brighter we become, the more information, the more people are able to think rationally with good information. I think the better systems and policies that we'll see implemented overall.
Thank you so much, Dax.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
Had a great time.
Thanks for listening to Your Best Defense Podcast. If you need a passionate, energetic, and unintimidated defense attorney, contact Jackie at FordLawOKC.com or call 405-604-3200. Remember, your best defense is a good offense. Jackie Ford, not afraid of a fight, and always fighting for what is right.